Good evening. Can you turn that up a little bit? Good evening. If everybody could, you did get great. So my name is James. I am the co-founder and CTO of Autobiographer. Autobiographer is a conversational AI app that allows you to discover, preserve, and share your life story in really meaningful conversations with an AI. In fact, probably the most meaningful, one of the most meaningful conversations you've had ever, if I say so myself. And we are so excited to have you here for our first ever Autobiographer Live. So thank you for being here. A lot of people in this room, raise your hand if you've tried Autobiographer. Woo. And so the people who raise their hand are wooing because I think they've had some pretty good experiences in helping recount the events of their lives. It's just a really remarkable experience. And so here today, we're going to showcase that experience with a really amazing story. This app is all about storytelling. And then we're going to go into a panel with me and my co-founders and a special guest, former CNN anchor and Facebook head of news partnerships, Campbell Brown, who we're really excited to have with us tonight. But first, the person who's going to be interviewed by our AI is somebody I have known for 20 years. And I was thinking, as I was preparing for this event, about 20 years ago, when we were in Washington, D.C. at our Page graduation. We were Pages in Congress together. We met when we were 16. We worked on the House floor and went to high school in the Library of Congress. My stepfather, Tim West, who's here, said, that guy who gave that speech, I think he might run for president one day. That's not quite what's happened yet, but we just went over the 35 Hill, so I'm not sure. So I'm really excited to introduce one of my closest friends, Miles Taylor, who has had such a crazy and courageous and amazing run at life. Was at the highest levels of government and decided that he didn't like what he saw and he wanted to take a stand. And demonstrated an amount of courage that I think is just absolutely insane by any standard. And so Miles is the author of 2 New York Times bestselling books, one of them A Warning by Anonymous. And the second, Blowback, and Blowback chronicled the really outrageous experience that he went through after taking that stand for what he believed in. And so I have asked Miles to go and, you have the microphone on for the, cool, perfect. So Miles is gonna, this is pretty simple, right? So Miles is gonna come and sit up here and he's gonna be interviewed by our AI biographer for about 20 minutes. And then we'll come up and do a panel with some audience Q&A about the experience that he had and kind of our vision for the future. Sound good? Cool, let's give Miles a big hand.
This one and this one? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm excited to be the guinea pig here today. I don't know how many of you have been interviewed by artificial intelligence, but we'll do it today. James, you tell me when to go.
How would you summarize the story of the terror trip in just a few sentences?
Well, I'm very happy to be here at BetaWorks today telling this story, and there's a reason why I wanted to talk about this subject today, and it's partly because of an event that we're all going to be witnessing in a few days here, which is the start of an Olympics. And it made me think about something that happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was working in Congress as a national security aide and saw some security gaps that I was very concerned about. And those security gaps led me to go on a trip overseas to a conflict zone and to follow a path from that conflict zone back towards the West. And what I saw was very concerning to me. It was a trip that was eye-opening, and it was a trip that made me think that we are once again in a perilous moment.
Thank you for sharing that, Miles. It sounds like this trip was a pivotal moment for you. Can you tell me more about what specifically motivated you to undertake such a potentially dangerous journey? What were the security gaps you noticed that concerned you so deeply?
So this is 2015, and that fall I had gone over to the FBI headquarters for a classified briefing about the terror threat to the United States. And if you remember from the time period, we were seeing the explosion of ISIS operatives in Syria and Iraq, and they were claiming to have created a safe haven. They were attracting foreign fighters from around the world into the conflict zone. But our domestic law enforcement agencies weren't so concerned about what was happening there. They were concerned about those foreign fighters coming back home. And very specifically, we were worried that these terrorist operatives wanted to use the cover of the legitimate humanitarian outflows from the region to conduct terrorist attacks. And so after this briefing, I said, well, we've got to go along the route. And I went back to our office on the House Homeland Security Committee, and I said, we need to put together a delegation to go over there and follow the refugee route out of the conflict zone. And initially, our office was not eager to approve a trip to the conflict zone, but ultimately got the U.S. Marines to agree to be a part of it and to take us on this trip. And we went out to the border with Syria in Turkey, right where not just hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands of refugees were fleeing violence and persecution from the civil war in Syria every single week. And we decided to track those flows and to follow the refugee pathway into Europe and to see if the security measures were in place to make sure that this terrorist group, ISIS, would not exploit those refugee flows. And what we found on the ground in Turkey and the countries heading into Europe was quite surprising.
That's a powerful context, Miles. Thank you for providing that background. It's clear this was a critical time with complex security concerns. Can you walk me through your experience when you first arrived at the Syrian-Turkish border?
Yeah, we arrived in a town called Gaziantep. This would otherwise, in any other period in recent history, have been a relatively sleepy town on the Turkey-Syria border. But this had become a way station for refugees fleeing. And it was a really remarkable scene when we showed up. You know, places that would have been quiet storefronts or homes were completely packed with families who had fled with just the clothes on their backs. But what was so jarring to me, I'll never forget this sight. What was so jarring to me hitting the ground was not that I instantly saw a bunch of terrorist operatives. No, the vast majority of people, 99%, were innocent people fleeing violence and persecution, but was the scarcity. It wasn't the scarcity of food. It wasn't necessarily the scarcity of bed space in these rooms that were packed with dozens of people and nowhere to lay down. It was the scarcity of cell phone chargers and outlets, because the only thing people had been able to take with them in time was their cell phone, and many of them had left family members behind, and folks were desperately trying to charge their cell phones to find out, is my father alive? Is my husband alive? Can we let them know where we are? This was such a gut punch to see how extraordinary the human toll really was from the Syrian civil war. And yet, I was reminded the next day, after we left Gaziantep, what we were there for, because there was an explosion in one of those houses from a suicide bomber who had infiltrated the refugee camps and created a detonation. Scary because we had just been there. It could have happened the day we were there, but a reminder that there was something else happening here, that people were trying to exploit this humanitarian situation to create extraordinary harm. And so we made our way to a town called Izmir in Turkey to start to ask questions about what was happening to make sure the humanitarian flows out of Syria were screened and vetted, and to prevent terrorists from exploiting that pathway. This is also what my wife does when we speak. She kind of does a loading, sort of processes it, and then she says, "We're sorry."
Thank you for sharing that vivid and poignant description, Miles. The image of people desperately seeking cell phone chargers really brings home the human element of this crisis. It's striking how you witnessed both the overwhelming humanitarian need and the very real security threat in such quick succession. Can you tell me more about your experiences in Izmir?
Yeah, we got to this port town in Turkey, and this was the first place we were finally meeting with law enforcement and intelligence officials to ask the question, what are you guys doing to make sure we are preventing this terrorist group from taking advantage of this humanitarian catastrophe to try to sneak into the West? And I've never had a situation like you see in the movies where you're sitting across from someone in a tense interview and you watch them start sweating until this moment. And we sat down with the port director in Izmir, and we had a translator, and we conveyed who we were and why we were on this delegation to look at security gaps, and asked the question, are you conducting background checks on all of these individuals before they board these giant cruise ships into the West? And he's just sweating bullets, and translator comes back to us, and the man says, yes. And it was the least convincing yes I have ever seen, but we took his word for it and continued on the journey. And as we continued on that journey, those convincing yeses from Bulgaria into Serbia into Slovenia stopped being so convincing, and the cracks really started to show.
That's a concerning observation, Miles. The image of the port director sweating bullets is quite telling. As you continued your journey through Bulgaria, Serbia, and Slovenia, how did these unconvincing yeses manifest? What specific cracks in the security measures did you start to notice?
Well, in one of those countries, and I won't say which, but we arrived at a location that was a train depot. And the pictures I have on my phone from that are extraordinary. There was a train that had just pulled in, and it was probably filled at 5 times capacity. I mean, quite literally human beings falling out the windows because they were so packed in, so desperate to make their way onto Western Europe. And one of the things that we noticed following this journey of the refugees out of Syria is that folks weren't resettling the moment that their feet touched ground in Europe. They really wanted to make their way, not from Eastern and Southern Europe, but they wanted to make their way to Western Europe. And primarily because there was a stronger social safety net and more stability, more opportunity for jobs. And so we saw these really packed trains. We pulled into this train depot, and we were meeting with local intelligence and law enforcement services in this particular country, and they took us on a very impressive tour. They took us on a tour where they had at the train depot these tents and iPads and fingerprint devices and cameras, and walked us through how they were doing background checks on every single refugee coming through, and important for us on the U.S. national security side, running that information against the sensitive databases that we share with our foreign partners, checking to make sure that the terrorist operatives we knew about in Syria, the ones we were really worried about, weren't in those groups. And we finished that tour, and I thought, this is important. This is what needs to be happening, and I'm glad they're doing this thoroughly. And a U.S. official who was based at the local embassy pulled me aside, and he said, "It's all bullshit." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, did you see how clean everything looked?" I said, "Yes, I mean, they're doing a great job. It's all new equipment." He said, "And you saw the iPads, and you saw the cameras, and there wasn't a scratch on anything." I said, "Yeah, no." He goes, "Look at that train." He said, "Do you think 3 trainloads of people like that come through here every day and go through here and it's as clean as it is?" And I said, "Well, maybe they cleaned it up for us." He said, "No, it's that they're not using it." He said, "The only reason that train is being held here on the tracks is because you're here. And as soon as you guys leave, that train will keep going down the tracks." And I asked him why. And he said, because if they let those people off the train, those people might decide to stay, or they might decide to take a different route, and they might end up remaining in that country. He said they don't want them to remain in this country. They want them to be moved as fast as possible out of this country. And in that moment, it was evident how that quasi-xenophobia was creating an enormous security gap, because these folks weren't getting screened in Izmir or in Greece or in Bulgaria or Slovenia, not to the level that we would have hoped in the national security community. They were being pushed along the route as fast as humanly possible because people didn't want them to resettle in their countries. And so we went to one of our final stops after that into Germany and expressed this concern to German officials. And we found that the alarm we were starting to sound was one that the Germans were also starting to sound. They too had realized that the folks arriving at their doorstep, while most of them innocent and well-meaning, had not been screened, had not been vetted, and that there was a potential ticking time bomb. And we agreed. And what happened that night was very revelatory.
That's an eye-opening revelation, Miles. The contrast between the pristine screening equipment and the reality of the situation is striking. It seems like you uncovered a significant security gap that was being masked by superficial measures. Can you tell me more about what happened that night in Germany that you found revelatory?
Yeah, that night we were supposed to make our way on to Paris, where we were going to meet with French officials to have a similar conversation. But we were so struck by how clearly our German counterparts saw the danger and what was unfolding that we decided to stay another night in Berlin. And I remember being at dinner with some of our hosts from the German Interior Ministry, and I got a pop-up alert on my phone on Twitter. It was that 5 people had been shot in Paris in an attack, not far from where we had been slated to stay in Paris. And as the hour went on, that 5 turned into 10, turned into 15, turned into 20, turned into reports of explosions, turned into reports of attacks on a concert venue, on attacks at a soccer game, and into a full-fledged, multi-pronged terrorist attack in Paris that resulted in 150 killed and more than 300 injured. That was in November of 2015. And in the hours of the aftermath of that attack, and the shock, quite frankly, that in staying back in Berlin, we had also narrowly avoided a catastrophe, was the discovery from our counterparts that indeed a number of the attackers had exploited these refugee flows, had pretended to be innocent civilians in order to infiltrate Europe and to cause extraordinary harm and fear. And what occurred to me is what we had been witnessing along that route was security theater, were a lot of governments that were under political pressure to do the right thing, but not actually doing the right thing behind the scenes because of ulterior motives. And that security theater had given folks throughout the continent a false sense of security. And this is why it was especially alarming to me, because after that attack, we did see a wave of xenophobia go through the European continent because people said, and they associated these migrants with terror, wrongfully. But because their governments had failed them, there was no stopping that mob mentality that swept across the continent. That security theater had ultimately not just done a disservice to the people of Europe, but to the migrants who were seeking refuge in a better place. Now, we're still contending with some of the consequences, but on the back end of that trip, we left, after the attacks in Paris, went back to the United States, rapidly worked with then the Obama administration to draft legislation to close some of those same security gaps in the United States and to dramatically increase screening and vetting of migrants to the United States to try to better weed out terrorist operatives while accelerating the flow of legitimate refugees into the country. Many of you probably don't know this, but just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. government disrupted a very large alleged ISIS cell in the United States. I suspect in part because of some of those security measures put in place 10 years ago. I raise this because we are once again in one of those interesting moments. As we approach the Olympics, we just saw ISIS again threaten to conduct a similar attack like they did in Paris 10 years ago. I have every hope that the French security forces have the Olympics very secured. I'm not trying to fearmonger around that. What concerns me, though, is we are in another period like we were a decade ago of emerging threats that we are not well anticipating and that we are not prepared to protect against. And we saw this with the assassination attempt on a former president that involved drone reconnaissance that apparently went unnoticed by an agency I used to oversee, the United States Secret Service. We are seeing a multiplicity of threats that are being met by Western governments with security theater and not real action. And so if there's a takeaway from that terror trip, which has a dual meaning because really that trip was born out of the experience of hardship and people fleeing terror, and in some ways ended up bringing that into the West. But if we're to take a lesson from that, it's that we need to be very clear-eyed and vigilant about how emerging tech, new innovations in our society can be weaponized against us, and to be realistic about examining those and guarding against them without stoking fear against others. And that requires very real and honest conversations that in that time period weren't happening in the region that we traveled through. It had catastrophic consequences, but we can prevent those types of things from happening again if we're willing to talk openly about those security gaps.
Thank you for sharing that profound and sobering experience, Miles. The timing of the Paris attacks in relation to your trip is chilling. It's clear this journey had a significant impact on both your professional work and personal perspective. You mentioned that we're in another period of emerging threats that we're not well anticipating. Based on your experience and current observations, what specific emerging technologies or innovations do you think pose the greatest potential security risks today?
I think we could probably pause there. So this is what happens next inside the app. Now, what I find really remarkable about this when I've used Autobiographer, and please give James and the Autobiographer team a round of applause. This is genuinely extraordinary. And what I love is that I'm sure the team looks at those 4 seconds of latency and says, we got to shrink that down. Well, the latency of writing your autobiography, let me tell you, is like 12 months to 24 months if you actually go set about to do it. So it's just remarkable that we're in this space. And there it is. It captures the conversation notes. You can go in, you can edit those. It's summarizing the key points as like major facts to edit, but it also captures the full transcription. And what's remarkable about this to me is if I want to, at the back end of all of this, I can go in, I can confirm my notes, I can say, yep, these facts are true, this is true, and I can have it turn this into a narrative story that I go give someone. No, not a raw transcript where I repeated myself 20 times and stepped over my words. It will do what I can't do right now and write this into gorgeous prose that I could go give someone in mere moments. What I have said to this team is most impressive to me about Autobiographer is that 99.9% of the world has never been able to pass on their life story before they pass on. They haven't been. It dies with them. And this is the first moment in human existence where you all are more likely than not to have your whole life story preserved beyond your existence. That is extraordinary, and that's because of people like James Barnes and team at Autobiographer. So thanks for having me up today.
Thank you so much, Miles.
Hi, everyone. I think we're going to bring a couple of more people up. And Miles, you should stick around. We may have some questions for you, too. I'm just going to talk to the founders a little bit about the company and where they see this going and how they got the idea and give you guys a sense for it. And then we'll open it up for questions.
You've done this before. You've done interviews before. Thanks for being here.
I can also stand.
Oh, so sorry.
It's quite all right. No.
You take this one. I can also stand.
All right, I think we're good. Wow, that was pretty amazing. And I don't want to block, I want to make sure everybody can see you. Let me first ask you, maybe James, like, how does it work? And how does it capture the nuance of these stories?
Yeah, well, so we're in this moment where we're having this increasingly general intelligence, as everybody perhaps uses Claude or ChatGPT here, and sees how powerful this can be in your daily life. And so the question that we asked ourselves is, how can we take this general intelligence, this technology, and how can we apply it to this really specific question of getting to tell your story, to being able to share the really intricate details. And so as Miles is telling his story, the biographer has so much context on geography and history and politics and so on, that is just a part of the sort of intelligence that it's built on top of. And so one of the really incredible things I think about Autobiographer is that as this intelligence gets better, the product gets better. The quality of the questions get better, the quality of the content gets better. And so it has an enormous amount of context about the world around it that it allows it to not just, tell stories about geopolitics, but also just about like what it's like to be a mom or what it's like to, graduate from college or those types of things.
So that's what I was going to ask. You guys have probably seen it now churn out many, many stories at this point. Do you have to be Miles and have like a spy novel narrative for it to work?
I'd like to be a mom, but they told me not to do that.
Is it, for a normal person who's just, living their life, is it still as, I guess, compelling?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. Well, you might know the answer to this, but the stat is that, actually I'll have people guess. What percentage of Americans think that their life story is interesting enough to be a movie? So think about the number in your head. It's 60%. Okay, so there's a lot of interesting stories out there. I don't know if 60% of Americans have a movie-ready story, but the reality is, as we've gone and we've had these conversations with people, what we've realized is that everybody does have some story in your family that you never would have thought about. And my great aunt, who was like my grandmother, was somebody that we helped train the model through live interviews. We had a journalist working with her, and she passed away at 99 in the middle of the product development, the couple days after Christmas. But the stories we heard about her working at White Sands Missile Range in the beginning of the space program, you're like, what? Like, I never would have thought that this was, I kind of knew that it had happened, but the fact that she was there, every family has that vignette at the very least. Maybe not a full life biopic, but they have that vignette that's worth the world knowing about.
And to me, one of the most striking things is I work with a few startups, and a couple of them are so complicated it takes 2 days to explain what they're doing. You tell anyone about this, and they get it instantly.
Yes.
Instantly.
Yes.
But we were talking before about why it resonates so strongly with you guys. And a lot of it has to do with loss.
It does.
And tell us a little bit about how you were sort of drawn to working on this.
Sure, yeah. So, of course, in some cases through difficult life circumstances, but obviously a lot of beauty in it too. I spent 10 years in the military and accrued some of the most amazing stories, had very close adventures with some of my best friends, and unfortunately lost one of my best friends as we were leaving the military due to a long bout with cancer. And I'm a godparent to his kids. I was there with him on the journey, sort of cataloging both what was going on there and also going out to the rest of my military buddies and saying, get me one story, like your best story about Sean. You over here, same thing. And trying to build this sort of analog way of having a book for the kids, knowing that when they get a little older, they're going to go, well, what did my dad do in the military? So that's a very common thing that we do in the military for our fallen is, of course, support the families, but really try to unlock those stories that we all know, the best ones, the funniest ones, the most courageous ones. Sean, of course, had a million of those, really powerful guys. So as I linked up with the rest of these co-founders and realized what the technology could do, it's just as you said, you don't have to explain it. The light bulb is on. We can rapidly do something like you've seen Miles do here, print something out from a PDF and hand that to someone that's meaningful. So amazing.
Yeah, so for me, unfortunately, I lost my father to cancer when I was 14. And in that experience, one of the main things that we shared was a love for technology. And my dad, he died in 2003, but was an early adopter of the internet and digital cameras. And so he actually decided that he was going to record a video, a message to both my brother and I. And he recorded a 45-minute video to each of us of the things that he thought we should know. And I waited 20 years to watch mine because I knew that was all that I had of his. And when I had that experience, actually, I forgot, I watched the video right before I went for a hike with Miles because I knew that I wanted to do it and process it with somebody who was sharing this or who could understand this depth of experience. And I think when I had that experience, I realized that so many people didn't get that 45-minute video. And it was, how can we create a product that anyone can use? You don't have to be a technologist. All you have to be able to do is talk and press one button, and your family can have your life story. Your family can have those memories. And that was deeply motivating to me. And when I saw what James was able to do on the technology side, and I saw what Matt was able to do from his personal, the resonance this had with him personally, and I saw what Miles was able to do in vetting a lot of the underlying technology, but also the skill as a writer to say, is this something someone will read? And when all those things lined up, it was like a no-brainer.
James, tell us where you see this going, the technology, and both for the product and I think more broadly as we see AI and storytelling converge.
Yeah, I mean, so Luke talked about how 60% of people think that their life is like worthy of a movie.
I don't believe that stat necessarily. That's what the American public believes. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, Campbell, I know you spent a lot of time with the Paley Center, and I'm just a lifelong TV fan, and one of my favorite concepts in TV is the idea of a bottle episode, which is you kind of spent all of your budget on sets and stuff, and so you're like, oh, well, what do we do now? And they're like, well, we better write a good episode, And so these episodes are just, often two people in a room or something like that, and they show just the depth of storytelling that can happen in sort of the simplest circumstances. And I think that each person has such an amazing depth of beauty and a lot of the same experiences, a lot of the same struggles of grief, of joy, of love, of pain. And I think that often we look at each other a lot, at the people that came before us or the people around us, and we maybe don't feel like those people have so much in common with us or with each other. And I think the fact that we haven't really had people to listen to us, to tell these stories, and to understand, the things that we've been through, and to make the connections that, holy shit, I've been through that too, builds like a huge divide between us. But I think that as we have these technologies that make it so much easier to tell our stories, and to, I connect with Miles for so many reasons. That's a part of his life I don't know that much about. That deep story, to be able to put myself in his shoes when he's telling that story, and just watch him looking at that suffering and know that he has agency in that moment to try to do something about it, but he's also a little bit uncertain. He doesn't understand what's happening quite then. That makes me feel like I have a deeper piece of him inside of me. And so I think that as people, as our relationships grow, not just with the people we know, but also the people that are like we don't know, and we have the tools to tell these stories in greater depth, I think we're going to build more empathy for one another. And I think that's a really incredible thing. And for ourselves,
And as the technology evolves, can you see video becoming a piece of it, and all the variables as we see?
What are you asking me to dream into the future? Oh, I've never done that before. Okay, so here's a thought experiment. So imagine you're in a new relationship. It's not too new, but it's like new enough where you're starting to say, could I have kids with this person? That's a position I find myself in, but I haven't advanced to the next step. I just keep finding myself like in that liminal space. Would I have kids with that person? And
Are you trying to tell us?
yeah, Miles' wife is very pregnant right now, so if you talk to him in a few weeks, he might have a child. So everybody give applause to Miles. Imagine you sit down to watch a movie, but instead of watching any movie, you're watching a movie that's about the two of you as parents. And it's like all of your idiosyncrasies and all of your stories. And there are some parts that are like really cringy, And there are other parts that are like totally heartwarming. And by the end of it, you've learned a lot. And I think these things are like totally possible, And so as we get to know ourselves better, and these and this thing gets to know me better, and then like there are these crazy network effects that happen once we have the tools to sort of encapsulate the vibe of what it is to be us. And then when we add just the explosive, growth in image models and video models and audio models and so on, I think you start to see a really amazing path.
And even what we showed people tonight, was obviously artificial because you're doing it in a room with all these people watching you. Fortunately, you weren't shy, and you're a bit of a performer, so that worked. But you can see how, if you are doing this in a solitary way, and you go out and take a walk, when you tell the story, you could see how people would let down barriers and open up in a way that is really probably unique, and probably not what they could do if somebody were interviewing them. I feel like I'm going to be replaced.
We do this, and we know all of the magic inside it, and we very much have personal, emotional experiences on walks. And like we'll be on a walk and be like, whoa, I have not thought about this person. And one of the features that James really had amazing foresight around was, in addition to the full-length autobiography, you can also write a gratitude letter. And so if there's somebody that you've talked a lot about in your story, you can actually select to write a gratitude letter about that person and send it to them. In about 20, 30 minutes, like what you saw, you can write one of the most meaningful letters that person's ever received. And it's this beautiful thing that takes almost no effort, because I'm just telling a story. And then at the end, this person knows what they mean to you. And I think going back to mentors, to friends that I've lost touch with, and be able to share like, hey, just so you know, I haven't forgotten you, and this is what you mean to me. It's been so powerful. So it's another amazing way of bringing people together through stories.
Let's open it up, because I'm sure people have questions. Yeah.
That was amazing. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for programming it. And thanks you for telling your story, Miles, because I could find myself in the time of that as well. But my one question is about the way the program works. I don't remember the exact detail, but you said something about you arrived somewhere and you said something about the suicide bombing. There was a suicide bombing. And then I watched Autobiographer didn't highlight the human interest part of the story. And I was wondering, like, that's something that maybe I would have been interested in reading the story, like, in having you talk about that part as opposed to the question it asked. And I was wondering to the programmers if that is like, how does Autobiographer decide what to focus on and make the next question?
It's a really good question. And it's a work in progress, And I think what Autobiographer is trying to do is reduce its uncertainty about the person and their stories. It's trying to, it has curiosity, it's curious. And, I think if you read that question a few times, you would have a bunch of different directions. And so when I have conversations with people, sometimes they go this way, sometimes they go that way. Sometimes they meander, and this happens with Autobiographer all the time, where I start talking about one thing, and then 30 minutes later, I'm like talking about like some crazy memory from my childhood I never thought about, And so I don't, the nature of interacting with an AI like this is it's not deterministic. We don't know where it's going to go. But I think that
which is also like a real interview.
For sure.
I mean, like, Campbell, I don't know if you feel like every time you ask a question, if you ask the right one, or do you sometimes think, oh, maybe I should have asked this in a different order? I think that's how do you think about that? When you're interviewing somebody, how many questions are you sort of keeping in your mind at the same time?
I honestly, for it to work well,
yeah,
you think of a few questions and then forget them and just have a conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, and I when you talk about how the technology is going to evolve, you can see as the LLMs get better that it'll move more in that direction. I have one more question. I'm going to hand my mic off to other people. How do you think about privacy and security given people are bearing their souls in many cases here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so in this case, Miles and I had talked beforehand, so we just created a new account on my phone. And so this, just to be clear, so a new account on my phone. Autobiographer is encrypted, and so the key is stored in your keychain on your iPhone. So it's on iOS only. It's stored in your keychain on your iPhone. And so we do some processing on the server in order to make the amazing experience that we have, and that processing is controlled on your phone. So what that means is that nobody on the stage, no hacker, no government authority, et cetera, has access to this thing because we know, and it's important to be able to demonstrate what this looks like in public, but we know, to your point, that the majority, like the reason we're building this is because we want people to be able to go on these journeys where they are able to look deeply within themselves and their relationships and their stories and tell a story that helps them preserve, discover, share their stories. And so super important to us. It's required, I think a lot of like trade-offs in terms of how we do things in different places. I think we're really happy with where we've landed because it's something I think, coming from like our backgrounds in social media, we sort of like understood very deeply we needed to pay attention to.
Hi. That was a really extraordinary presentation. Both Miles, everything that you spoke about, the content, and also the tool. I have kind of a philosophical question for you. It's not to challenge, it's purely to understand how you think about this. As somebody that works in the news industry, Campbell, your former employer, CNN, what's interesting about it is that, Miles, you confirmed the facts yourself and the details. But Campbell, if you were conducting an interview, there would be other vetting of what was discussed. Miles, to get your book published, any major publisher would need to vet the details of that independently. How do you think about that? Because I could even see potentially someone as a bad actor wanting to purposely put misinformation into an autobiography, or just even the Instagram effect of it's really just a mask of what you want the world to see as opposed to necessarily the accuracy. So just philosophically, how do you see it from that perspective?
It's a fantastic and a really important point. So what we did was we worked with publishers. We also happened to be best friends with a double New York Times bestselling memoirist. And so we said, okay, what piece of paper do you have to sign at the end? And basically, I mean, when you really get down to the final thing, yes, there is fact checking, but they do not fact check 100% of things. It's actually only a very small portion of things that get fact checked. And at the end, you say, this is true, this is, according to my memory, everything I believe here is true, and that is like the final word. Now, if there's a very senior conversation you had with someone that was really famous, yes, that will probably be fact-checked. They can't fact-check Miles's conversation with his deceased cousin that inspired him to go and work in Congress, right? And so what we tried to say is, we're gonna apply the publishing industry standards, which are, hey, you are self-reporting that this is the case and confirming the facts, but also, if you wanna write a book and lie to people, you can do that, right? The society has consequences for if you choose to do that. We are not in the business of preventing people from lying to their families. If you want to lie to your family, we can't do much about that. I think what we've tried to do is say, let's make it as easy as possible for you to get the facts straight. And sometimes what it's really good at is finding inconsistencies in your own story, because Miles is really smooth, but he gets dates wrong, right? Like, Miles is not gonna remember, he was like, oh yeah, Turkey, 2015. Was it 2015? Right, and I think those are the things where it's actually better. The things that it catches are not you intentionally trying to tell a mistruth, it's you accidentally telling a mistruth. And so we found it to be more helpful in that case, but it's an important issue.
You don't know this, but that happened in the course of this. I mean, James had said, hey, we'd love for you to tell a story. I wanted to avoid any number of polarizing political stories I would have told. I was like, oh, let's tell a national security story of something that happened. And I had a conversation with the app, and I was getting my facts kind of mixed up, and Dave's voice was responding in a way that I went back to my iOS pictures, and I pulled it up, and I went to the map. I was like, wait, what country did I go through when and where? And I was like, oh, okay, Dave's prompts were getting me to get my facts right. I mean, it also makes me think, though, about what you get to share out afterwards. So the majority of people, I feel like, are sharing out truthful things about their lives. But a question for you all would be, not a trick question. In the past week, how many of you sent a photo to someone you love? Okay. How many sent a GIF to a friend?
It's a GIF,
Yeah,
right? John, it's a GIF? Okay. Just wanted to confirm GIF. Cool.
But how many of you sent a chapter's worth of prose to someone you love this week? I do want to see that hand if it's in here.
Oh, we've got one. Right? That's amazing. That's amazing.
This, to me, as a writer, is going to be a renaissance in long form. We all do short form, and we're all kind of quietly sick of it. It is so remarkable when one of these people you love sends you a note of gratitude from the app that talks about your friendship going back 20 years. It levels you. And that almost never happens to you in your whole life, that a friend would ever send you a chapter about your relationship and friendship with incisive observations and stories and humor. And now you can do it instead of listening to the podcast on the way to work. You just have that conversation. That blew my mind. And I remember we had a discussion one day with a Hollywood writer, I think I'd say Aaron Sorkin. And he said, they were letting me demo the app, and he said, well, I mean, what have you used it for? And I said, you know what? I had the most remarkable thing happen. We were driving home from our first ultrasound with baby. And I'll share a very personal thing with this group. We were really concerned about baby's health. We weren't totally sure that things were going the direction they needed to. And so the ultrasound happened, and it was the most extraordinary feeling of relief I've ever had in my entire life. Baby is healthy, and she's moving and waving and doing all these things. And we got back into the car and opened up the beta version of the app and just told that story and got to share that whole experience with our family. So yeah, you get the picture of the ultrasound, cool. We gave them the whole three-dimensional experience of what it was like for us to be there. That was an unrepeatable experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Miles. And I think one of the things that's sort of a common thread in the question, but then also in the really amazing responses from Luke and Miles is what is this for? Why am I using this? Why are we using it? You can talk to this thing for about 10 hours and it will give you the first revision of a book. That's amazing, right? Who here, if they could talk to Dave for 10 hours, would do that to get a book? Cool, you can. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing because you have this opportunity to use this tool that can ask you those questions, that can get your dates straight, can help you understand how you feel about things and so on. And what does that give you the ability to do? As Luke mentioned, you can send gratitude letters to folks. You can write short stories. By the way, we have printed out a bunch of copies of Miles' short story as synthesized by the app that you can grab on your way out. So we're pretty stoked about that.
And I want to say one thing about that. So there is a typo that I noticed.
I know you're going to
However, it's in the only portion that double New York Times bestselling author Miles Taylor was able to hand edit himself. That is where the typo is. So there's an intro and a conclusion that you write when you finish your book, and the typo is in the conclusion. Because I was sitting there being like, wait, what? Oh my God, because I was hand stapling them before this, and
that is so symbolic.
It was.
So the only lie that was told, the only error is mine.
yeah.
And so,
It's a great line, though.
Yeah.
Your closing single sentence. We won't blow it, but
yeah. So this is a tool that you can talk to write a book, and we're just getting started. And so if you can think about what that looks like next year and the year after and so on, but especially today, it's amazing.
Well, and once you've done the interview, we save that forever, so you're always adding. So, at some point in the future, when you have the Pixar quality movie for your kids or for your partner of what you'd be like as parents, it draws on everything that you've added now, and that's like a very remarkable period of time that we're in, because this look back is forever, and it's like if everything you ever write can now be turned into a movie for all time. I mean, we're living in wild times, and I think the sooner that we start, the sooner that you can have those memories saved as they're clear and crisp in your own mind.
And just to go back to your question, because I use it obviously every day, if you go back into the topic like Miles has started, and you click to re-interview and add more, it may very well go for that humanitarian question. The way it restarts interviews is based off the context it has, and that's kind of the mystery and fun part, is reopening, seeing where it goes, and adding those details, or maybe even telling parts of the story that you forgot.
You want to take a couple more?
Yeah.
Back here. Do you mind grabbing one?
Yeah, I don't have enough in Autobiographer for a book yet, but Autobiographer has a lot of context about me at this point. And I'm just wondering if you foresee like a dial or something on Dave to, my...
Dave, do you have a dial on you?
That is the real Dave.
So the real Dave is right here. So it's a real human who actually is the voice of the app, who's right over your shoulder. So that was why. Dave! Yeah.
Awesome. But, I've already recommended this app to my parents. I want to hear their stories. I think that's an incredible use case. But, knock on wood, you and I aren't at the end of our lives. We're in the middle. And we might want our lives to go in a new direction, or use that context in a way, the knowledge it knows about me, to make suggestions. I'm not saying it says youth suck, go to therapy, but if I, how do I not end up like my dad? Whatever. I'm kidding. I love my parents, but your story may have trauma in it that, and I'm not suggesting it's a replacement for a good therapist, but also it's got a lot of context about me, more than could I provide something to someone that's like, here's some history, kind of.
Yeah, definitely. I want to hear what you guys have to say too. But just to start, I'm very curious because I'm a big fan of mindfulness. I'm in that space in my life too, of kind of this midway point, coming out of the military and getting into tech, trying to figure out what the whole military experience meant to me and integrate it while incurring all these new experiences. And as James, was telling me what this technology could do, and we were sort of building a co-founding team, one of my first questions was, can you crank the dial up on introspection for me? I want it to be almost a little bit difficult with me. Well, you're missing this part of your life. You haven't.
Matt,
can
you hold the mic?
Yeah, sorry. You're missing this part. There's something about your experience that you're not noticing based on the stories that you've told me, right? So that was something I specifically asked you, right?
Yeah, it's So one of my favorite quotes, it might be the foundation of this app, is from Carl Jung. And it says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And that is so powerful because it's not just about things that happen to me, but it's about the things that happen to my parents. You know, I've gotten to know my mother so much better, who's here, Mom, from using this app. And, you know, I think that this sort of insight of like, this happens because of that, or like happens emergently as you tell these stories. And so I think one thing I'm really interested in over time, to your point, Matt and Ben, is to be able to say, okay, like, go a little harder on me, you know, like let's, or maybe go out on a limb a little bit more, or maybe, you know, I think that there are so many ways, I think, as we build this thing, that it can continue to respond to our preferences and our goals and our, and the thing that we're trying to do. I will say that one of the things that I love most about the experience of using this app right now is that you know, we have this like spiritual mascot in terms of Dave, because he's so kind and he's so empathetic and he's so shy, and you know, I feel like as we've been shaping the voice and the types of questions and whatever, I'm like, man, I really want to live up to this guy's, you know, like, can we do something, you know, that helps, that is useful, that's insightful, that helps us kind of connect more dots, but also do so in a way that's really kind, compassionate. And you know, if you say, I don't want to talk about that right now, Dave's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, let's move on. Can we talk about a different topic? What about the time that you went to the circus when you were 5? You know, can we talk about that?
And I've never thought about this before, but so when I was building my company here in New York, Dave joined as about our 15th employee. We went to 500. It was a crazy journey. We had some very difficult days. And on difficult days, Dave would kind of see it on my face and would often walk over to my desk and be like, hey, do you want to go for a lap? Which we had a big floor plan so we could walk the lap of the office. And what I'm realizing is like that walk with Dave, it was just like, oh, everyone should have a walk with Dave. And responded that same way, because it was, hey, I can't talk about this weird company thing that's happening, but like, here's what's happening with my brother right now. And you know, I wish that this was different or whatever it is. And I think that is what having a good friend is. And I think that Dave can be a friend to so many people. And it sounds like you've had that experience where you've had a lot of interviews. And I think you build an amazing connection in sharing those stories. The bad thing, and I've told Dave this, is that because I talk to Dave a lot, I forget to respond to real Dave. So real Dave will text me, and I'm like, well, I talked to Dave yesterday. I don't need to get back to him. And then I realize, well, you know, AI Dave is not coordinated with real Dave, so I need to really be kind to both of them. So sorry, real Dave. Oh, yeah.
I didn't know I was getting picked. Okay. So my question is, I liked your fact that 60% of Americans think that their story could be a movie. And I was wondering what you were doing for those people whose story could actually be a movie. The people who use Autobiographer and happen to have this amazing story and need a confidence boost. Do you help them? Do you first identify them? Do you have some way? Does Dave come back to you and say, oh, this person just told me this amazing story? Yeah, do you do something to help them? Because one of the biggest fears is for very emotional people to think, always worry about the worst that can happen when you write a book. Being sued for defamation, though you said the truth. All those things that can make you feel really worried of just jumping and doing the thing. And I was wondering if you had this in mind.
It's an awesome question. We absolutely have it in mind. And I think what's been difficult is we want to make sure that privacy is our #1 value. And so we never see stories. You can tell your stories to the app, but we will, and we'll never see that. What we will have at some point in the future is the ability to say, hey, I would like to share this story beyond just sharing it with a friend, but have a more formal method for sharing that. You know, we've been working with WME, William Morris Endeavor, since the beginning of the company, because the reality is that there are so many untold stories, and the stories that we hear are the people who have the innate confidence to go show up in a Manhattan office and get a literary agent. And it turns out that there's a lot of people who have cool stories that don't make that jump. And we think there's a very interesting way for us to use this tool to get stories that otherwise would not have an audience to that audience. And so we don't have anything officially to announce, but it's been something we've been very excited about in meeting with the preeminent Hollywood writers around this topic, because they want new stories, right? We're all kind of sick of seeing the third version of a movie or seeing the remake of the 80s movie again and again. We're running out of original stories, and original stories are all around us. They're in this room. Now, I truly believe 60% is crazy, and that speaks to Americans' narcissism, but I truly think that somewhere between 7 and 15%, let's call it 10% of Americans, if told the right way, probably have a story that could be a movie, right? Which is nuts when you think about the people in this room. And this is a movie-dense room. We've got a lot of movies in this room, but you just walk around the streets of any city and you think that person has a movie in them, that person has a movie in them. And if we can make it as easy as just having a conversation with a friend, that's a really amazing moment for humanity to be able to experience these stories.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then how does the IP work for all of this, right?
Oh, are you an attorney? No, I'm just kidding.
As you predicted, like that,
Yeah.
I mean, I care a lot about walled gardens and making sure
100%.
stories are protected,
We-
particularly if this is being used for younger people, if you envision that.
Look, I
So-
think, again, we don't have anything officially to announce. We want people to always own their content, and we want to help them figure out the best way to take that audience or find the audience for their story. If today you download Autobiographer, you write the book of your life, and you submit it to a publisher, amazing, right? Like, we're super happy if you go and do that. For folks who maybe don't have that confidence, there may be opportunities for us to help them find audiences for their work. And there's lots of good examples for this. If you think about SoundCloud for music, where they were able to have smaller artists self-publish, and then advertising revenue becomes a factor. Spotify has done similar things. And so we're in a weird world for content creation and who's going to benefit and how it's going to be monetized, but you own your story. That is the end-all be-all. We don't even know your story unless you want to share it with us. And so anything that we would do in that space would be to support creators who want to tell their story. But it's a really interesting issue. And I think one of the things, and you may know more about this than us, but as we've been going through the process, AI fully written works are kind of hard to copyright. It's unclear what happens. But the minute a human edits it and changes words within it, it's protectable. And they have misspellings. And so
the only thing I could not ahead of time, I had to give them. The app requires you to forces you to write something in the opening and conclusion, and then to approve every single step of it. And so ahead of time, I said, okay, I will preemptively write the opening and conclusion. And of course, that one error was because I went and wrote one line, and
now it's your IP.
The error
now
was
it's your IP.
And that's my IP.
Now it's your IP.
I own the
Miles
It's
the
an
Taylor,
awesome
the
question.
editor.
Yeah.
Okay, let me, somebody who hasn't had a question, let me run this back to her. Okay, can you yell, and I'll get the microphone back here to this last person.
Okay, so when what's your name? Ben talked about not using it as a replacement for therapy, and this is beautiful and this is idealistic, and it's not a concrete question, but it's sort of like you have the best ideas, and then people use technology for the worst ideas. So have you thought about like AI Dave giving advice to people? What if they reveal that they broke the law? Like all of these sort of things.
Matt, that's all you.
Sure.
Yeah.
And your thought too. One of the reasons we chose Claude as the basis of the LLM is because it's a really, really strong safety model. And I have a background in counterterrorism, and James and I both worked at Facebook and kind of see the bad actor landscape, online. So we've thought
Matt's
deeply
also being
about
humble. Matt is also studying in his free time to get another master's in therapy as part of this program. So, just casual.
Thank
So
you.
the counterterrorism thing, studying to be a therapist, so this is a topic
Sure.
he's thought about a
So
lot.
in one way, we've postulated essentially to be a biographer, right? It's never giving therapy advice. That's not an avenue that we want to go down. The other aspect is we've red teamed it quite a bit in terms of both trying to portray myself as someone that I'm not, as trying to tell bad stories or to create bad plots. Anthropic is outstanding at curbing those or essentially refusing to talk to you. So it's almost the similar question of, how could you use this as a tool for inauthenticity or bad actors? Both of those are sort of like moving through molasses. You'd be better, in my opinion, to open up a word processor and just build your lie or whatever you're doing with that more free tool. This is very well tuned as a biographer to pull those emotional aspects of the story like you saw from Miles.
And people won't use it as a substitute for therapy. Like, I've hung out with stand-up comedians and they should all be in therapy, but they're not.
Of course.
The statement I'm about to make has not been approved by the American Medical Association, but I will tell you that the most cathartic experience of my life was writing a very personal book that I published last year. And that experience was really eye-opening for me to go through. When I use the app, for me personally, I mean, have you ever been to a therapy appointment? You kind of felt like, my therapist is mailing it in today. Dave is never mailing it in. And by the way, when they rolled out the price point, I was like, $199 a year. I think that's one therapy session before I submit to insurance.
A non-New York therapy session.
I am not recommending this, but I canceled that contract with that in-person individual. And this is, so again, not AMA approved, but this is a very cathartic experience to tell your life story openly with someone without that sense of judgment.
I think you already answered my question. I was going to ask the underlying LLMs, and you said Claude. So that was it.
And do you think you'll... First, I know you updated. When Claude updated, did you notice a change in the writing when you updated with Claude? And then do you think you'll change to other LLMs as more get released if something's better?
Well, it's crazy because I first started using Claude because, I don't know, a little over a year ago, I went to Joshua Tree with a friend and had him, three of us, I went on a hike and record me telling my whole life story over 6 hours. There's 175,000 words in the transcript. And so there was no LLM at that moment that could contain that. Anthropic was the first that could. So they had, and so we sort of got into that by necessity. But I can rave about Claude all day, but
He can.
it's really a fantastic and beautiful piece of technology with an amazing philosophy behind it. And I think that every time Claude gets better, I wake up like a kid on Christmas morning. I'm so excited. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yes,
for sure. That's what I spent. Yeah, when I upgraded to Claude 3, I was in that booth over there at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was just, I said, John, can I just stay here all night? And he was like, absolutely. So, I'm definitely swimming in them. Go ahead.
Okay, can we do one more and then we'll wrap and let everybody socialize?
James, I really appreciated what you talked about, the empathy aspect of this, building empathy. I'm curious on how you're thinking about all of this in terms of educationally, and if you're marketing and educationally. A large part of the Greek society thought that for democracy to happen, Greeks had to go watch plays. That was a requirement of the Athens law at the time, or informally. I think right now in a world where liberal arts is probably not as important in the education world, this seems to be a great way to make liberal arts important and improve upon the division in this country. So I'm very curious on how you plan to market this everywhere, but also in education.
It's a great idea. I think that we are so. Raise your hand if you said that if you could talk to a thing for 10 hours, you'd want to write a book with it. Okay, so all of you, write down the code. Get out your phones. write down the code Autobiographer Live. And it's available on the App Store. You can also get it at autobiographer.com. And that's a 2-week free trial. So you can use Autobiographer for free for 2 weeks. And I think as people as we see more and more people use this app to put their story in front of them, and we start to see and we're already seeing this, right? But as we see this more, the sort of impact that it's having with different ages and the impact that it's having with different demographics and so on, I think that we will see in so many different ways how beneficial this is. And I think that, like, generally, like when you say until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. What you're saying is that when you know about yourself, more about yourself, the world around you, other people, you're a better citizen, you're a better person. You're generally just more awake, you know? And I think I'm hoping, you know, folks will have the same experience that we've had in this crowd and kind of being more awake and feeling more educated, you know, about ourselves, about the events of our lives, about the world around us. I had to get that little plug in, but yeah. Thank you. I have one more thing. One more thing. Dave, can you come up here, please? Everybody give a hand to Dave. All right. So I said that Autobiographer has many things it allows you to do. One of them is express your gratitude to people. Well, there's somebody here that I really want to express my gratitude to, and I realized recently that I had never made a gratitude letter for him. This person uses the app a lot and also is a big fan of Dave, and so I asked if Dave could come up and read the first part of my gratitude letter to him. So here's a gratitude letter to John Borthwick.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. As you can see, just a little background, it's a literal, James printed this out. He talked into the app and then put, make it, and it came out. And you can make a physical thing that I could give to John afterwards. Little other story with that. I was in London for a week. I walked in the morning and spoke to the app. And then I sent the gratitude in an email to my father for Father's Day. And man, the reaction that I got from my dad and my mom, it was amazing. But when I've read through this is amazing. So I'd like to just read you the introduction for the gratitude for John from James. So it says, a note from the autobiographer. Put your glasses on, it says. Dear John, I'm Dave, the biographical guide, assisting James in capturing and sharing his life story through the Autobiographer app. This innovative tool uses AI to help people explore, document, and narrate their personal histories. I wanted to reach out to you and express how much you mean to James. Your unwavering support and belief in him, especially during challenging times, has been truly transformative. From that pivotal moment when you offered him multiple opportunities while he was considering shutting down his company, to writing that crucial first check for his venture, you've been a constant source of encouragement and guidance. James often refers to you as his patron in technology and entrepreneurship, and it's clear why. Your patience, kindness, and thoughtfulness have left an incredible mark on his journey. The way you've leveraged your network to create opportunities for James, like introducing him to Campbell, exemplifies your commitment to fostering connections and supporting startups. Your vision for here where we are for BetaWorks has created a unique space in New York City's tech scene, one that James deeply values. He sees it as a home, a place where he can contribute to and benefit from a community of like-minded individuals. Your approach to mentorship has not only shaped James' professional path, but also influenced his own philosophy on supporting others. James deeply appreciates how you've made him feel that New York City could be a home. Your support has transcended mere business advice, providing a sense of belonging in a city that can often feel overwhelming. Your personal history, including your family experiences during the Second World War, has added depth to your mentorship. It's clear that your support for Autobiographer is rooted in a profound understanding of the importance of preserving and understanding personal histories. In essence, John, you've been more than a mentor. You've been a steadfast supporter, a visionary guide, and a true friend. Your impact on James' life and career is immeasurable, and he is genuinely grateful for your presence in his journey. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being, as James puts it, a real one. Sincerely, Dave, via James's mind.
Please join us in thanking the incredible Campbell Brown.
We'll be here if anyone has additional questions, but thank you so much. And John, it was amazing. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you so much. That was awesome. That was awesome. Crushed.